Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, folks. Hey, welcome to another episode of the Marketing Your Practice podcast, the podcast where I get to simplify the marketing and the mindset for chiropractors so they can increase their income, their impact, and their enjoyment in practice too. In today's episode, I've got a return guest, the amazing Jessica Mercer. She's the chiro content creator, and I just love what she brings to this world, particularly for us as chiropractors. I mentioned inside it, when I'm talking to Jessica, how much I love it when I find somebody who's not a chiropractor that loves chiropractic the way we do. In fact, BJ, one of my favorite BJ quotes says, "I love you because you love the things that I love." I know it's a bit self-centered, that quote, but I love it anyway for those same reasons. Now, Jessica and I have a chat about the importance of the language that we use, and particularly making sure that we're using language and using the language of our audience. One of the things that we do as chiropractors all the time is that we make things way too complex and we confuse people. And when you confuse, you lose. We also spend some time talking about how to build community and connection. There are two different sorts of posts that we can create. There are posts that are designed for transformation to help somebody get a health result. That's some of what we should be sharing on social media, but the vast majority of what we should be doing is creating connection. Remember this, don't underestimate the power of likability. After all, we like doing business with people that we like. Jessica also spends a bunch of time, because she's on the battlefield, so to speak, working and creating content for a bunch of wonderful chiropractors. She shares exactly what's working right now. I think Jessica's ace. I think you're going to love this episode. Let's go and talk to Jessica about how we can have more impact in our communities. Enjoy the show, folks. Love you all. Jessica Mercer, welcome to the Marketing Your Practice podcast. How are you, my friend?
Good, Dr. Angus. Thank you for having me again. I'm excited to be back again. I love our conversation so much.
Likewise, the feeling is very, very mutual. I love what you bring to the world. I didn't know that you are also a part-time renovator as well. Maybe we'll get into that conversation as we go forwards. I was looking back through our past. So if you haven't seen Jessica's recent episode, I think I'll have the show notes in there as well, because if you didn't listen to it, you'll want to go and listen to it, because she's brilliant and she brings a real expertise to us as chiropractors with regards to marketing and particularly into content creation. You and I were chatting the other day and you shared a story with me and I went, that's podcast worthy. And it would be like, well, I'd like to kind of begin our conversation if that's okay. Can you relate that story back, and let's start from there?
Yeah, so it was so funny because, I have a toddler, like most people in the family practice world. I have my own kiddos, and I'm just laying there, like, at the end of the day, trying to get her to go to sleep, doing all the shushing and lullabies and all that. And I just had this, like, core memory brain blast of a few years ago. So by degree, I'm a elementary education teacher. So that's what I went to college for. I did the full, internship. I actually was in the classroom for 2.5 years. And I really loved teaching, but I really didn't love the classroom. And that's a whole nother thing. But I had this memory of this internship that I was doing. I was in a 5th grade science room, and I was with this teacher that I absolutely adored. He was brilliant. And for a little background information, a lot of the schools in our county don't have a specific science class. Science is sort of worked into the curriculum throughout math and language arts. So this was a really cool opportunity to be in a dedicated science classroom. And I wanted to, like, make the most of this opportunity and impress this intern teacher and, like, get the kids to love me and do all these things. So he was working on the digestive system, and I could have come in and done, like, the super simple lesson on the digestive system, but I'm like, no, these kids need a hands-on experience. Like, I want to do all of these things. I had these big ideas of what I wanted to teach the kids without any background information of what they already knew or what they enjoyed or how they enjoyed learning. So I came in all guns blazing. I did this story, or not a lesson, on the digestive system that included pantyhose that were supposed to be like the digestive tract. Okay. And then the kids worked in groups, right? And so they're each given like a baggie with like some bread. It was really disgusting now when I think back to it, with some bread and then some water. And so their job was to, like, put the water in the bread and, like, in the bag and mush it all up and then pour it into the pantyhose and, like, make its way through the pantyhose until all the water was out and all that was left was, like, this bread turd, more or less, right? Yeah. So I'm like, this is great. They're really going to get, like, this hands-on experience. But what actually unfolded was, I was so nervous because I never really, like, interacted with these kids before, that I couldn't get my directions out very clearly. when the kids did get started, I also had parent volunteers in the room too. So it was like all of this pressure, these parent volunteers, because we knew it was going to be messy. The kids are like gagging because of the texture of the bread and the water in the bag. When they're like pouring it into the pantyhose, I have like parents and kids all like gagging and borderline vomiting while they're trying to like get the food into the pantyhose. And I'm thinking like, this is like a complete disaster. And so the kids got through the lesson, and they didn't learn a thing about the digestive tract, obviously. They just like survived this terrible experience of pantyhose and mushed up bread. And I was like, now reflecting, I was like, that was a terrible lesson. So after I've learned so much about communication, just with my marketing and my content business and stuff, I had this like flashback moment when I was laughing at myself for like, why did I even think that was a good idea? Yeah. And then two, I was like, this would be a great teaching moment about how even I struggled to communicate and like what I could have done better in that situation to make it make sense to the kids. So it's this messy story.
So tell me from that, what, if you were to kind of link that over to what we as chiropractors often do with our messaging, what are the similarities and the mistakes that we make that have us going down a path where no one ends up getting our message also?
Yeah. So what got me started with all of the content was that I realized when I was looking for a chiropractor to work with my daughter, that as chiropractors and like myself in that classroom, I'm communicating up here. Like I understood what digestive tract was. And so I'm trying to make the kids understand on this level, they're really down here.
Yep.
And with chiropractors, what I was recognizing and what I recognize happens often is you are so brilliant, right? And you're so invested in the information that you have that you're communicating up at the level of another chiropractor versus down at the level where the patients need you to communicate, or those kids needed me to communicate. And so nobody's getting the message, especially not the people who actually need it. And so you're frustrated because, you know, you're putting out all this content that you think is incredible, but it's not achieving you the results that you want because your consumer.
There's so much assumed knowledge that we have as chiropractors that runs so deep, even from the most basic of anatomy and physiology, and then we get into neurology. And then on top of that, most chiropractors have really advanced health philosophies as well. You know, the simple idea that the body is self-healing is foreign to most people, like it's, you know, and we will throw that out there, which is a very simple sentence. And to most people, or to many people, that doesn't land the same type of way. Why do you think that? You know, one of my favorite sayings I got from Don Stevens, the guy who wrote Build a Story Brand, several things like that too. And he says, when you confuse, you lose. One of my favorite things to do at the moment is to look at chiropractors' bios on their Instagram or Facebook. And man, you would need to have at least a university degree in some kind of anatomy and physiology to understand what they're saying that they help families with. Why do we have such a hard time in kind of dumbing it down, do you think?
Why do I think you have chiropractors in general have a hard time dumbing it down?
Yeah.
Well, to piggyback off of your game that you're playing right now, it really is a fun game, right? Because you go in and there's like a million abbreviations in a bio of we do this, this, and this with all of these techniques, but the consumer has no idea what you're talking about.
Yes.
So they're just like, okay, signing off, I'm going to go find someone else that I can actually, you know, understand. I think that in my personal opinion, I think that the difficulty lies in really, it goes back to really understanding what that means to the consumer, right? So if we go in bios, if you're putting in there, oh, I use, you know, KST, that's one that's on a TRT or something like that. And you know that that's super impactful for a specific reason, but the consumer doesn't, it's confusing. And why it's difficult to dumb it down is strictly because you have so much of the knowledge that you don't remember what it was like on day one of chiropractic school when you really didn't have the knowledge and exposure. And so you aren't able to communicate in that way, but that's what the consumer needs for the most part, especially on social media.
And I wonder, because there are many times where I've taken it a step further, and with my peers as well. And so if a patient would come into me in the early days and say, oh, I really feel like I need my neck cracked, I'm like, that was just like a red flag to a Red Bull. I was so offended that somebody would call it like my neck crack. And I would immediately get on my high horse and tell them I don't crack necks. When in actual fact, that's just kind of based on the understanding that they have at that stage. And it's also not unreasonable. If you sat back and watched what happened in my practice, we had an open practice. It really looked like I cracked a bunch of people's necks.
Yeah.
And we often receive that in a way like it's a personal attack from people. And
Right.
if we can be gentle with them. I remember Robert Cialdini's work, where he was looking at, one of the things he says in influence is it's really important for us to use the same language exactly as our customer. And the example he uses is when people are going to a restaurant, and if they order a sandwich that might be like, I have a ham and cheese sandwich, hold the mayo. Now, if the server repeats back to me, ham and cheese sandwich, no mayo. So instead of saying hold the mayo, they say no mayo. They got a significantly less tip than if they used the exact language. And so I learned that in my initial consultation, that to use the same language to somebody. So if somebody came in, and it used to really kind of grind on me in the early days, someone came in and said, look, I just really feel like I need my neck cracked. Okay, got it. So you feel like you need your neck cracked. I'd mirror that back to them. And then we could build a bridge down the track, maybe not on the first date, in terms of, because first of all, what a great way to build a relationship by making somebody wrong. So that's not a strategy that we want.
Yeah.
Yeah, not a strategy that we want to use as well. So I'm encouraging people all the time is simplify it. What is the language that people use? So how do you find that out? Like, how simple is too simple? What language do we use? How have you come across this information as someone? I just love people that have come from outside the chiropractic profession into it. How have you come and found all of this type of stuff out?
I love it. And I love this question because it's when I say it, it's like an aha moment for people, right? So practitioners first starting out, this specific tip isn't going to be helpful, but the next one will. So if you've been in practice for a little bit and you've had people who have left testimonials or given feedback, when you go to those testimonials, you read the exact problem that you solved for those people. And then you can use that language when you're creating content for the next person to consume. So let's say, a particular patient who, was having trouble with bedwetting. They go in and leave you a review and is like, Dr. Angus, he was amazing with my child. He was so kind and compassionate and understanding, and he was able to resolve this bedwetting issue that's been plaguing us for 7 years, like all of these things. So then when you're creating content in the future, you go back to those testimonials. Okay, what was the problem that this parent was having, and how did I create the solution? And that gives you the exact language that they're using, because that's what they're beaming about. But if you don't have the testimonials, that becomes a challenge, right? Because you're like, okay, now I'm just going to guess. Well, Google is amazing, and that I don't actually think it's a Google company. It's another business called answerthepublic.com. And what it does is it congregates Google search results within the last 24 hours and gives you search terms. So let's say you are sports chiropractic and you're curious about what people are wanting to learn about or looking for in terms of sports chiropractic. You go to answerthepublic.com and put the terms sports chiropractic in, make sure you select the country that you're in, because it even does it by country. And then it gives you a visual, a color-coded visual of which terms are most searched, which ones are least searched, and then variations of the term. So if you're just uncertain, that's a really, really great place to start. And then once you get an idea flowing, it's going to continue to flow. But those are like top two.
We did an interesting thing with some of my coaching clients at the end of last year, where we got them to survey and have conversations with their patients. There was a couple of questions, a few questions asked. Two of them were this, is that when you're telling friends about us, what do you tell them? Like, so that's a great question. Like, so if you're describing what happens here, or if you're talking to them about what we do here, what do you say? And that's where you need to really listen out. The other question that's really helpful too is to ask them, How are we different here compared to maybe other chiropractors or other health practitioners, or maybe even other businesses that you've been to? And it was interesting because one of the chiropractors I work with over in the UK, the message just constantly, like, she hugs all of her patients. At the time she spent, there's this really deep connection that she has with them. And people constantly saying, nobody cares like you do. I've been to other people, you listened. It was the first time that I knew that you were in this for me. It was all of these things. And I was saying to her, that's your marketing. Stop talking about even chiropractic and just look, if you want to come to a place where you finally feel listened to, where you have a partner on your journey, where it feels like somebody's invested in your health as much as you are, we're the place for you. That is her brand and her message. So that's two questions I would really encourage people, along with those other beautiful suggestions that you have there too. You particularly do lots of content creation in for chiropractors that have family practices, kids and stuff like that. Can we talk, and can you share a little bit about the sort of content that you're creating, what you're finding is getting engagement, what's kind of working at the moment?
So, I mean, it's funny because I was just researching this in terms of videos, because there was a huge push in video in 2021, 2022. And I was like, okay, is this going to keep on for 2023? And how can we adapt to continuing to create video content? Video is king. It reigns king. But the thing is, not every video is created equal. And so it really does come down to what topic you choose to talk about in your video and how you create the video. With the data that I've collected recently, the number one reigning thing always in the history of my business is those posts that create a connection to the doctor themselves or the practice. So education is huge. I'm not saying don't go out and educate, but what I am saying, at least 20% of what you should be posting is those things that build connection and build trust with your audience. So maybe that, oh, I saw it beautifully done recently where it's actually one of my clients, I'm going to brag on them for a minute. They keep up with the anniversary of their patients. They work with kids, and they recognize that this one little girl wears slippers every time that she comes into their practice. And so on her 1-year anniversary, they gifted her a basket of slippers, and they took a video of gifting her the slippers and her reaction, sweet and genuine. And we posted that on social media. And it worked. It boosted engagement. It got people all in their feelings and warm and fuzzy. Like, those connection moments reign above all else.
Yeah, I'm such a big fan and encouraging chiropractors to do that. And we call it connection content there too, that shows who they are. The feedback I get from people about that, this is one of two things, and I'd love to know how you deal with this too. Sometimes, and there's even times for me, I'm like, well, why would people be interested, like, in who I am and outside of that too? And then the second is, I hear from people, I'm really quite an introvert, Angus. I don't really like sharing that stuff. How do you respond to those two challenges that people might have with sharing more connection type content that allows the community to get to know them?
Yeah, well, one, by feeling heard, because yes, it is challenging. It's challenging for anyone. And you and I, I create content for a living, and even sometimes it's difficult for me to do it for my own content. It does not come naturally to open up, create vulnerability. It feels a little unnatural. But to the first point, where why would anyone want to know that about me? Because we're humans. Humans crave. That's just in our DNA. And if you're put side by side with another practice and you're both doing the same exact thing, but you've taken the time to build a connection with your audience, or connect with a parent before they even come into your practice, or put out content that is about what you do in your weekends that resonates with that person as a family and their values, you're going to get chosen over this other chiropractor. With being introverted, it's hard. It's hard. My computer all day, put me in a room full of people, and I'm like, I don't know. It's, no one's responding from my computer. But the value that it adds has to outweigh the challenge. And if you as a person, or as a chiropractor, physically cannot make yourself like come up with content ideas and record it, then find someone, an accountability partner who's going to be like, hey, get on your phone and talk about this for 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And then hire one to edit it and put it on your Instagram.
Yes.
And it's just at this point.
Yeah, Jessica will help you. If you're feeling this way, then just work with Jessica. Her details will be at the end here. I think I often encourage people not to underestimate the power of likability, that when all else is even, we like doing businesses with people that we like. Like, in fact, it's been shown that, we'll probably deal with a slightly substandard product if it's from somebody that we really like. And if you think about the people that you do business with, there were a couple of coffee shops we used to go to when my kids were little. One where the coffee and the food was fantastic, but the staff were mean and grumpy. And another, which was the opposite, that the staff was wonderful. They greeted us by name. They knew what we ordered there too. And their coffee was okay and the food was okay, but it was like a 6 or 7 out of 10 there too. We went to that place all the time because we felt seen and heard, and there was a connection that happened there. So don't underestimate the power of that too. And I also like, because I sometimes see some chiropractors online sharing too much. Like I like the kind of, often referred to kind of the wedding test. Like, if you and I were seated next to each other at a wedding and I had never met you before, and this is our first conversation, I'm like, what would I be happy sharing with Jessica, and what would I be happy hearing from Jessica? So if in my first conversation I started airing the dirty laundry about my previous failed relationships, the challenges I have with this and that, you're like, man, get me out of here. I don't want to sit next to this dude for the whole time. But there are conversations that we can start that can connect us. Where you're from, what are you interested, what are your hobbies, all those type of things. And I think you're right in terms, I love that answer. Why would you do this? Because you're human. I look at my habits online, and what I connect with is when people are sharing with me behind the scenes. And I'm like, I like that. And very rarely do I look at that person and go, oh my, you can tell when somebody is sharing something vulnerable to get their needs met. You can tell. You look at it, you're like, I've seen this before. You get on here, you cry all the time. There's a whole bunch of comments underneath there too. This is not genuine vulnerability. This is a form of manipulation. We can sense that there too. But when there's genuine vulnerability about what my challenges are, stuff like that too, it brings a real authentic connection as well.
And if it's okay, I'd like to share sort of an experience I had in
Please.
November of 2022. So previous to recording, we talked a little bit about burnout and renovation projects and businesses. My background is I have a 3-year-old daughter. I have a relatively young business. And at the time before November, I had a massive renovation project. It was 4 units, an apartment building. My husband and I were doing it practically by hand. And we did it for 5 years. We renovated for 5 years. We had the baby. My business is moving in the amazing trajectory, but it all came crashing down in November, like the end of November, beginning of December. And, I didn't know what burnout felt like. So it was a little surprising to me. But I went to my community that I had crafted over 3 years by being open with them about so many other things. And I said, I am not doing well right now. I have got to take a step back. Here's what I need from you as my community. And when I tell you they delivered, like, I have goosebumps right now. My community delivered because we had a connection. It wasn't just, the chiropractic content creator with no name. And if you know my past, I've just recently become the chiropractic content creator. So it was even more vague, Mercer Marketing. But because they knew the human behind it, I had people coming out of the woodworks that I didn't even know were following or connected to me, offering to help. And it was like this moment of, this community really matters. And that community is a huge support. So there is something invaluable about creating that community and being somewhat open and showing the person. Again, like you said, you can't show up bawling your eyes out every week and looking for a handout, but there is a space for that vulnerability and that connection with people.
Yeah, I love that. And it makes me proud of humans to hear stories like that too. And, that's clearly a reflection of the relationships and the community that you have fostered throughout that time there too. So, yeah. Did
It's
you see
cool.
recently, I saw a post from Adam Mercer, who is the head of Instagram, for those of you that might not know that name. And on one of his weekly Q&As, he was saying, we think in 2022, he went too hard on videos, in particular too hard on reels. And we're going to be bringing some balance back to image posts again. I found that fascinating because most of us would have been aware in 2022, all of a sudden our Instagram feed just looked like reels, real. I'm like, this is the death of the photograph post there as well. And it would appear that they're going to start to bring some balance back to that too. I taught a class on that same note, and I would love to see your thoughts on this, where last year I just went, let me go over, and I did a podcast on it recently, the 9 different types of Instagram posts that we had. And I was looking at 2 things, engagement and reach. And so they're the 2 things that we want to have as, to build our accounts. So interestingly, not surprisingly, it was videos, in particular reels, that got the most reach, like 100 times more than anything else, that they were pushing reels out to new audience. However, it wasn't reels that got the best engagement. It was carousels. So not a surprise. You're nodding your head here too. And so I have been big on for a long time, and then reinforces last year. That's the 2 things that we need to be doing: reach new people, build carousels, engage with them as well. Have you found something similar there, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I actually have a video coming out on YouTube this week about like data and metrics on Instagram as it relates to those sort of APIs, right? Because it is fascinating. And truly it depends on what your goals as a business and practice are. So for example, you were saying reels really do reach the most people. Well, 100% yes, reels are reaching the most people that you can possibly reach, but are they the people that matter to your business or your practice? Number 1, boom. Number 2, with things like carousels that are most likely going to be informational, they might not get those like instant gratification double tap likes like we're getting, like some other reels get, or those lovey-dovey posts, but they're getting saved and shared, which are massive engagement metrics. So I don't know about you, but I find that there has to be a balance of everything. The ones that are massively liked, and then the ones that are like the carousel posts that are getting saved and shared, because that's telling you as a business, this person liked it enough to put it in their back pocket and refer to it later, or liked it so much that they're going to send it to somebody else to get that information out of. But absolutely, I'm finding metric wise that reels reach a lot of people, and that's cool if your goal is to reach a lot of people worldwide. If is to connect, educate, and grow a community of people in your local area, there's other types of posting that does that job as well.
Yeah. I find the numbers an interesting thing, because I grew up, started my practice in a pre-social world where every week we would do what we call a spinal care class. Bad name. Who would want to come along to that? But we got people to come along to it. Did too. And I was thrilled if I could have 5 people there. Numerous times I did it to 1 and 2 people. Got a bit awkward, but it was always fun. Like there was value there to deliver to them. And once we got chatting, but as there were 5 people sitting there with me, knee to knee, to go through this 40-minute class, I was thrilled. But now somehow our sense of, if I've only got 500 followers, or if I create a video and it's only watched by 35 people, I'm like, do you know how many people 35 is? Like if you had 35 people in front of you that listen to that 60 seconds, first of all, make sure your 60 seconds is valuable of information. But that's a big deal. And then, but we go searching for, we've had 3 or 4 reels for our practice get in excess of 1 million views. And it's made no difference to anything at all, other than have a whole bunch of the wrong people now following our account. It's more of a pain in the bum than anything, because it then mucks up our metrics, our engagement, that what we want. What we do is that our practice is in a community of 15,000 people, and then we pushed out to the surrounding, it's 45,000. So ideally we would have all 45,000 of those people. So when we have 2.5 million people watch that, then, they are not our customers, but yet we get excited about those numbers that too. What are your thoughts on all of that stuff?
I think it kind of goes back to that instant gratification I mentioned a little bit ago, because I mean, I find myself doing it too. I'll post a story and then look to see how many people looked at it, or I'll post a reel and look to see how many times it was played, because it feels good to be seen. And just like we talked about in the beginning of this, like it feels good to be seen and heard. And so people and businesses are equating those metrics of how many times has my video been played, and how many times has somebody liked this. They're equating it to like, what is that instant gratification? And then there's this assumption that you have to have thousands and thousands of followers to be successful. And I'm sure you experience the same thing, where people are saying, hey, I say, well, what's your goal? Like, what's your goal of working with a content creator? Okay, get 1,000 followers. Like, we want to grow and grow and grow. But why? Right? And so my opinion on it is always more impactful to have a quality following over a quantity following, with the exception of situations where perhaps what you do could impact people worldwide. Like, let's say you're in an online space, an online coach, and you can work with people at a worldwide capacity. Then in that case, I could see where it would be beneficial to be reaching masses. And this is going to be Billy Chow coming out of me. If you have the systems in place to be able to on-take those thousands of people, then sure, it could be beneficial. But for the most part, and for most people who are interacting with you and I, it doesn't behoove to have a massive quantity. It behooves them to have a really good quality of followers or likes, or whatever metric we're looking at.
Yeah, I love it. I also, my nerdy side of my brain, Jessica, just loves how linked in you are into metrics as well, that we can share this in terms of here's what's now, because it's careful. I don't, and I don't, if you're listening to this, what Jessica and I aren't saying, there's no accountability, and it does, because you want to watch and see what works. If you happen to be posting these bits that are sharing behind the scenes, that, just a story, and you notice that this gets a lot more engagement, learn from that. But the fact is, not every post is going to go viral. Many of them won't. There are lots of people a lot more clever than me that have tried to find the formula for it, and I'm not sure that anybody has yet. There are lots of factors, one of which is just luck. The one video of ours that I mean, last I checked, it has in excess of 3 million views. It's the silliest little video. Like, there's nothing to it that would, say why this happened, but it just kind of took off and people watched it. And then that was a signal to Instagram that it kind of kept on happening from there as well. What are you thinking as far as pushing forwards into 2023? What are you thinking as far as trends and things to focus on with your content creation?
So, because we are both total data nerds, I really feel like people hate the word "it depends," right? But it truly depends on what your data showed from the previous year as to what you should focus on as a specific business or practice. But if we were going to blanket statement, I always guide my clients to do a little bit of everything, right? So you don't have to go gung-ho into the reels and do one reel a day for the rest of your life. I have a client who does one reel a week and is incredibly successful in that she gets a ton of reach, if that's the metric, right? But then supplemented with those trust building things, with those testimonials, with those letting them into the practice behind the scenes, with the educational why we do what we do, and marrying it all together. It has to be like a melting pot of all the things that people need to hear. And that's a challenging answer, right? Because anyone listening to this is going to be like, well, crap, how am I going to do all of the things?
Yes.
But it's really about a well-rounded approach. And I think going into 2023, that's sort of the vision that people have to see. It's well-rounded, holistic approach to marketing and content.
Yeah. So do you see, given that you're looking at metrics from different practices, are there significantly different things that work for different practices?
Yeah. So like, if we talk about virality, I had a practice who went viral with a reel about the poop button, like the poop button adjustment, right?
Yes.
And And after that one went viral, and we all know that chiropractors follow each other, then I started to see many chiropractors making a poop button reel, but it didn't work for them. Why? Luck, one, two, consistency. So no, not everything's going to work for the same person. And when you look at stuff from the data back end, it really does depend on who your audience is. Do you know the audience? Are you speaking to that audience? Because if you put the same thing, like if I were to go to my custom clients and put the same thing on both of their pages, it's not going to perform the same. I'm not saying that one is going to perform poorly and one is going to perform great. It's just speaking to that specific audience. So I'm not sure if that answered the question. I went down a rabbit hole for a second.
No, well, it kind of brings it back to, looking a little bit at the data. So let's talk about that, some basics. So if somebody's listening to this now and says, look, I want to have a look back through 2022 and see what worked and what didn't. Could you help them clarify maybe what worked means? Where would they go to find this? Let's just stick with Instagram, for instance. Where would they go to find this information? What should they be looking for? And how can they use that to guide them in 2023?
Yeah, good question. And like I said, I'll have a YouTube video up that we can put into the show notes. It'll really go in depth. It's going to be a few part series that talks about the different social media platforms. Instagram is actually the easiest because it has an innate insights section within it. Now, the caveat, you have to have a business page, right? So you can do it with a personal page. But let's say that I'm, going to go into 2023. I want to make my marketing plan. I'm going to go to my specific profile. And within that, you'll see something called a professional dashboard. It's going to be at the very top of your profile. And it's a space where all of the data is housed within Instagram. Now, there's quite a few things, and you could get lost in the sauce very easily. But because we're talking about a well-rounded approach, if I were to, say, for example, someone did this brilliantly. They looked at their top saved, like the top 4 saved posts, the top 4 liked posts, the top 4 shared posts, and the 4 that got the most reach. And then those became monthly newsletters for 2023.
Yes.
So we backtracked if we were to actually find those metrics though. So you're in your professional dashboard, and within that space, it'll give you options to filter. Do you want to filter these by post type? Do you want to look just at your reels, or do you want to look at all of your content? How much do you want to look back? You could look back 30 days, probably 14 days, 30 days, 90 days, a whole year. You can set custom date rates. And then once you set your filters as to what exactly you want to look at and how far back, then it populates the data for you. It's going to show you, what is my top saved post if you choose to filter by saves? What is my top shared post? And because the goal is to take that holistic approach, you're going to want to look at what those top posts are in multiple categories and use that, study that a little bit without going too crazy in depth, but study it a little bit. Why was this saved? How can I recreate that with maybe a different topic? Or how could I recreate this in a different capacity? Let's say you had a carousel that you created for someone that got saved and shared a bunch of times. Okay, could the information from that carousel be turned into a reel in 2023? So working smart with what you already had in 2022, taking a holistic approach and repurposing. I mean, there's so many layers to it, right? We could get into
the information is all there. I mean, we started off this conversation by saying we need to understand our audience and know their language and what they like. This is how you find out, to some extent, what content are they engaging with, and look for, excuse me, let's see if you can find trends in amongst that too. If you're all 4 of the reels that are the most viewed happen to be you adjusting bubs, then learn something from that. If the save posts all happen to be carousels, then learn something from that too. I worked with a chiropractor for a little while. Every time he did a post in around tongue tie, it just lit up. And I'm like, make more content in around that. Well, I don't want to be known just for that. Well, I'm like, it's you won't be. But this, I think fundamentally, the question we have to ask ourselves with marketing is, am I marketing so I can tell the world, is it an out thing where I'm wanting to tell the world about what I want them to hear? Or am I marketing because I want to solve a problem? They're kind of, which way am I doing this to? And so I think and I really like what Seth Godin says. He says marketing is the generous act of solving somebody's problem. Like that's what it is. It's generous, it's service-based, it's solving somebody's problem there. And so we can shout to the cows going home if we want to talk about innate intelligence and subluxation and vitalism. And I'm not saying that we never have any of those conversations, because they're part of the journey. But I think a lot of those conversations belong in-house when we start to build a relationship with somebody, or we drop them in there a little bit as somebody's going through their learning journey with us there too. But we can't start with that in many cases. And yes, you have some patients that are incredibly intelligent along their learning spectrum there too, but sadly, that's not everybody at this stage there too. What are you excited about in 2023, Jessica?
That's a good question. I'm excited, from a personal and a business standpoint, I'm excited to connect with people. I set a huge goal for this year to lean into what fuels me up, and that's connection. And so I'm to have, deliberate conversations and connections with people. I'm excited, like we all are, to just, continue to grow. But I think that that's above all else what my burnout taught me was I crave connection like every other human. And I'm excited to create the space to be able to do that with people who fill my cup, who are smart, brilliant, intelligent people. I think that's what I'm most excited for is quality connection in 2023. And I know that everything else that I desire is going to trickle from those quality connections and doing things like,
Tell me, where can our listeners connect with you so they can be a part of that? What's the best spot for that to all happen?
Yeah, if you want to be my friend, but I really do value connection. So on Instagram, that's where we hang out and do a lot of that casual connecting. My Instagram handle is the Chiropractic Content Creator. I also have a Facebook group that's just for chiropractors. In there, we also do a lot of hanging out. I do some educational stuff in there. And that's called Content for Chiropractors. The Facebook group is. And, if you just want to drop a line on my website, like, hey, let's reach out, let's connect, then it's the chiropracticcontentcreator.com.
Yeah.
But
beautiful.
any of those capacities, you're going to get directly.
Lovely. We'll have all of those in the show notes, as well as the link to the YouTube video, so peeps can watch that also. Jessica, wonderful to catch up again. I know this won't be the last of our conversations. Good luck with 2023 and refilling that cup and loads more connection as well. Thanks for chatting with us today.
Thank you. It was awesome to chat with you. And again, thank you for having me. I always enjoy the time that we spend together, though it's virtually.
Likewise. Chat soon.
All right.
If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, you have to come and check out my Community Influencer Program. It's my monthly coaching program where we take all this material and I'll work with you to help you apply it, implement it, and systemize it. The Community Influencer Group Coaching Program is designed to help you increase your practice income, impact, and enjoyment. Join me over at anguspyke.com/join. That's anguspyke.com/join. I'd love to see you there.